Look, Trump had BRICS on the ropes. Just take a look at the last BRICS summit. It was held in Brazil. Lula wasn't able to advance very aggressive policies because there was domestic pushback, saying, no, India's sitting there having a tussle with China, and India's on the ropes. Do we want, we're not really all in on this thing anymore. So if I were Donald Trump, I would have went, all right, I need to incentivize Brazil and India. I mean, we have $1 trillion defense budget. I would have declared a national emergency, and I would have gone to India, and I said, what are you paying for Russian oil? How much Russian oil are you buying? All right, I'm going to work it. You're going to get all the oil you need at the price you need. I'm going to sell you subsidized American oil. We're going to get other people to sell you subsidized oil. We're going to meet the Russian price, but you don't buy Russian oil anymore. You buy from us. What can the Russians do at that point in time? You didn't sanction them. You just did better business. Now the Russians come in and go, well, we're going to cut our price even more. Well, isn't that what Trump just said he wanted? I want a $10 drop. Isn't that the cap that the Europeans said they wanted? We want to put a cap on how much money the Russians make off of oil. Instead of spending billions on weaponry that gets thrown out, you want to starve the Russians out. You're not going to do it with China, but with India, who went from buying 3 to 4% of their oil came from Russia a couple of years ago to 40% this last year. No, just subsidize alternative oil. Subsidize it. Make it competitive. It costs us money, but I thought the goal was to break the Russians. That's how I would have broken the Russians. I would have just said, yep, they need the oil. Let's make it impossible. And doing the secondary sanctioning, now you've threatened the sovereignty of India. And India can't go for that. They can't. There's no way they can do that. If I wanted the Indians to break away from Russia, rather than saying, you can't buy the S-400, I'd just say, your next purchase will be THAAD, right? Because we're going to offer to you great terms. We'll give it to you. We'll give you a THAAD. You want the best F-35? You want the F-35? You got it. Heavily subsidized. We're just going to throw them at you. And basically, you take the arms market away from the Russians. You take the oil market away from the Russians. Not by threatening anybody, just by going in there and outbidding them. It costs money. It's an investment. But what are we doing now? We're sanctioned. We end up paying those sanctions, the American taxpayer. We don't accomplish the mission. We end up isolating ourselves. We make ourselves irrelevant. It's not a sustainable business model. I mean, we can't do it forever, but how many years do you have to strangle the Russian oil, the oil export market before the Russian economy blinks? That's the question you have to ask. But Trump is incapable of doing that. I'm not saying it's 100% guaranteed of success, but there's a hell of a lot better chance of success. And the other thing you do there is now you create a problem because India now starts buying American oil or, oil not, and that BRICS relationship starts to get strained, starts to get frayed. And now you can start pulling India away and you incentivize India to stay with the G20. And maybe one of the things you talk to the Indians about is, hey, how does G8 sound? That 8 used to belong to Russia. But what if we went G8 and that's you, big boy, Modi, Mr. G8? How's that look? If you want to break BRICS, you don't attack them all and force them to come together, which is what Trump is doing. You find the weak link, India, and you do whatever you need to bring the Indians out of BRICS. And when you do that, it starts to collapse. It's no longer, you take the Indian economy from BRICS, it's a huge hit. BRICS keeps bragging, justifiably so, about, the fact that their total GDP is more percentage than theirs. But remove India from that argument no longer flies. I mean, you got China. China's, a big deal. But if BRICS is just seen as a Chinese play toy, that's not as attractive at this point in time as, this multipolar entity. India brings, an attractiveness in terms of other nations saying, yeah, we want to be part of that. That's why you see Thailand, applying. You see Malaysia applying, Indonesia becoming a member. This is because of India, because of Indian membership. And so all Donald Trump's doing right now is guaranteeing that India now, when they look to where to go for help, it's going to be BRICS. They just made India a steadfast member of BRICS. I personally am happy. There's going to be a lot of people that are, shut up, Scott, don't tell Trump how to do he's not going to do it, guys, so don't worry about it. But I think it's time for, a multipolar reality check. But I'm just saying that, if I were advising the president and was told, we want to achieve something, what the president's policy is achieving the exact opposite of what he wants to achieve. And what he's going to do is make America not the indispensable nation, but the irrelevant nation.
But the solution that you mentioned, that would take time. It doesn't be overnight, because we know that the identity of these oils are somehow different. The process of refineries, and it's all different, that they have to consider. We've learned that from the case of China. They were trying to replace Iranian oil with something else, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time to replace all of these facilities there and modify them and doing this and that. And for the case of
I agree with you. But, there are innovative ways around this. For instance, we know that when we stopped, buying Venezuelan oil, our refineries in the Gulf Coast were heavily dependent. They were configured for Venezuelan oil, specific kind of crude. It would cost a lot of money to change, as you mentioned, to switch over and modify to a different kind of crude. And once you do that, you have to make sure then that you continue to access that crude over time. We ended up turning to, I think it was the Russians for the Ural grade fuel, that because it had similar chemical characteristics, so that the refineries didn't have to be modified. And we were buying a lot of Russian crude to operate in our refineries. I'm not going to pretend that it would be easy. I'm just saying that there's, it might involve me covertly buying Venezuelan crude to replace the Russian oil. What I do is I find sources around the world that, have crude that can replicate the specific, chemical characteristics of the Russian crude, so that the Indian refineries don't have to undergo these things. Because what is my goal here? My goal is to bankrupt Russia and deny them, oil sales. And so if that's your goal, then get clever about it. But we're not clever. And, that then we'd say, well, we can't buy Venezuelan crude because we're trying to strangle them to death too. Well, that just means that you become irrelevant, because when you try to strangle everybody to death, you strangle nobody but yourself.
But if I were Indian, I would say that, so if we do all these modifications to receive the US oil, how about the future? Can we rely on the decisions that come in the next 4 years?
That's where being a lion sack of manure.
If the United States is willing to sanction us because of Ukraine, look at this. Yeah. Because of Ukraine, they're putting sanction on us, which we know that the importance of India economically, not just for the United States, for Russia, China, for the world. And you somehow putting pressure on India because of Ukraine.
You're right. I mean, look, what I'm saying is, on paper, there's a solution to everything if you're innovative enough. But once you get India to make fundamental changes, they have to be sustainable changes. And a lot of that depends on India trusting the United States to be a stable partner. I mean, the United States already has a problem where we've allowed ideology to infiltrate foreign policy to the extent now that every president ends up, getting us a knee jerk all over the place. Um, Trump's only around for 3 more years. And then what? So the Indians are, let's say Trump made me the negotiator. I went there and I found all the solutions. And I'm sitting there with the Indians. All right, this is what we're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And they're going to look at me and go, Scott, we think you're an honest guy. And this is a really, really interesting thing you've put forward here. But you work for Donald Trump and he disappears in 3 years. And what guarantees can you give me that the person that replaces Donald Trump is going to think this is a good idea? And you can't give a guarantee. Well, I think J.D. Vance is going to be, I can't guarantee that. Can't guarantee anything in the American. And so the Indians are like, no, even though what you said sounds good, no. We're going with long-term stability. We're going with people we trust. But because everything you're doing, Scott, is going to be based upon an executive order because you're not turning it into a treaty with Congress. And even if you did turn it into a treaty with Senate ratification, we see how the United States treats treaties. You just throw them away and they're inconvenient. And then we'll become inconvenient again. So you're 100% correct. I mean, my slick little brain could probably come up with a solution that works on paper. But translating that into diplomatic reality is impossible because nobody trusts us. And even if they trust this, if they, for some reason, decide to trust this administration, what happens if the Democrats regain control of the White House? They're going to dismantle everything Trump has done. Try to fix it, get it back to the way it was. Who in the world wants to deal with that? I mean, they already have to deal with this feckle and feckless, America that just shifts all over the place. But you're 100% right. This is why America has become, instead of the, indispensable nation, we become the, irrelevant nation because we don't matter. Not in the long term. There's no stability with us. We can't get a treaty in place because Congress is split and politicized. And no Democrat will ever vote for a treaty that's good for a Republican president. So the president will do everything based upon an executive order, which is immediately reversible the moment a new president comes in. You're right. I apologize for even injecting the possibility of America coming up with something clever. We can't because we're the worst people in the world to deal with. We stand for nothing. We are nothing. And nobody should ever trust us.